Well, chapter 1 was very exciting. Lucy has met a fawn, which is half goat, half man. Chapter 2, what Lucy found there. I am on page 11. Good evening, said Lucy, but the fawn was so busy picking up its parcels that at first it did not reply. When it had finished, it made her a little bow. Good evening, said the fawn. Excuse me. I don't want to be inquisitive, but should I be right in thinking that you are a daughter of Eve? My name's Lucy, said she, not quite understanding him. But you are, forgive me, you are what they call a girl? Asked the fawn. Of course I'm a girl, said Lucy. You are, in fact, human? Of course I'm human, said Lucy, still a little puzzled. To be sure, said the fawn. How stupid of me. But I've never seen a son of Adam or a daughter of Eve before. I am delighted. That is to say, and then it stopped, as if it was going to say something it had not intended, but had remembered just in time. Delighted, it went on. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Tumnus. I am very pleased to meet you, Mr. Tumnus, said Lucy. And may I ask, oh Lucy, daughter of Eve, said Mr. Tumnus, how did you come into Narnia? Narnia? What's that? Asked Lucy. This is the land of Narnia, said the fawn, where we are now. All that lies between the lamppost and the great castle of Cair Paravel on the eastern sea. And you have come from the wild woods of the west? I got in through the wardrobe in the spare room, said Lucy. Ah, said Mr. Tumnus in a rather melancholy voice. Melancholy means sad. If only I had worked harder at geography when I was a little fawn, I should no doubt know all about those strange countries. It's too late for me now. But they aren't countries at all, said Lucy, almost laughing. It's just back there. At least, I'm not sure. It's summer there. Meanwhile, said Mr. Tumnus, it is winter in Narnia and has been for ever so long. And we shall both catch cold if we stand here talking in the snow. Daughter of Eve, from the far land of Spare where eternal summer reigns around, the bright city of Wardrobe. I love the way that's written in the book. Make sure you're reading along on page 13. How would it be if you came and had some tea with me? Why, thank you very much, Mr. Tumnus, said Lucy, but I was wondering whether I ought to be getting back. Oh, it's just around the corner, said the fawn, and there'll be a roaring fire and toast and sardines and cake. Oh, well, it's very kind of you, said Lucy, but I shan't be able to stay long. If you will take my arm, daughter of Eve, said Mr. Tumnus, I shall be able to hold the umbrella for both of us. That's the way. Now off we go. And so Lucy found herself walking through the woods, arm in arm with this strange creature, as if they had known each other all their lives. They had not gone far before they came to a place where the ground became rough and there were rocks all about and little hills up and little hills down, and at the bottom of one small valley, Mr. Tumnus turned suddenly aside as if he were going to walk straight into an unusually large rock, but at the last moment, Lucy found that he was leading her into the entrance of a cave. As soon as they were inside, she found herself blinking in the light of a wood fire. Then Mr. Tumnus stooped down and took a flaming piece of wood out of the fire with a neat pair of tongs, little metal things to hold it, and he lit the lamp. Now, we shan't be long, he said, and he immediately put a kettle on. A kettle is something you would boil water with to make tea. Your mom might have a kettle. Lucy thought she had never been in a nicer place. It was a little dry, clean cave of reddish stone and a carpet on the floor and two little chairs, one for me and one for a friend, said Mr. Dumnus, and a table and a dresser and a mantelpiece, that's the ledge over the fireplace. And above that was a picture of an old faun with a gray beard. In one corner there was a door, which Lucy thought must lead to Mr. Tumnus's bedroom. I'm looking to see what Pistol's doing. And on one wall was a shelf full of books. Lucy looked at these while he was setting out the tea things. He had books with titles like The Life and Letters of Silenus, or Nymphs and Their Ways, or Men, Monks, and Gamekeepers, or A Study in Popular Legend, or Is Man a Myth? Now, daughter of Eve, said the faun. And it really was a wonderful tea. There was a nice brown egg lightly boiled for each of them, and sardines on toast, and then buttered toast, and then toast with honey, and then a sugar-topped cake. And when Lucy was tired of eating, the faun began to talk. He had wonderful tales to tell of the life in the forest. He told about the midnight dances, and how the nymphs, those are like little fairies, who lived in the wells, and the dryads who lived in the trees came out to dance with the fauns, about long hunting parties after the milk-white stag who could give you wishes if you caught him, about feasting and treasure-seeking with the wild red dwarfs in deep mines and caverns far beneath the forest floor, and then about summer when the woods were green. Oh, that's what we're waiting for. And old Silenus on his fat donkey would come to visit them, and sometimes Bacchus himself. And then the streams would run with wine instead of water, and the whole forest would give itself up to jollification. Jollification means to be very happy, for weeks on end. Not that it isn't always winter now, he said gloomily. Then, to cheer himself up, he took out from its case on the dresser a strange little flute that looked as if it might be made of straw, and he began to play. And the tune he played made Lucy want to cry and laugh and dance and go to sleep all at the same time. It must have been hours later when she shook herself and said, "Oh, Mr. Tumnus, I'm so sorry to stop you. I do love the tune, but really I must go home. I only meant to stay a few minutes." "It's no good now, you know," said the faun, laying down the flute, shaking his head. He was looking very sorrowful. "No good," said Lucy, jumping up and feeling a little frightened. "What do you mean? I've got to go home at once. The others will be wondering what happened to me." But a moment later she asked, "Mr. Tumnus, whatever's the matter?" For the faun's brown eyes had filled with tears, and the tears were trickling down its cheeks and soon running off the end of his nose, and at last covering his face with his hands. He began to howl. "Mr. Dumnus," said Lucy in great distress. "Don't, please don't. What is the matter? Aren't you well? Dear Mr. Dumnus, do tell me what is wrong." But the faun continued sobbing as if his heart would break. And even when Lucy went over and put her arms around him and lent him her handkerchief, he did not stop. He merely took the handkerchief and kept on using it, wringing it out with both hands whenever it got too wet to be of any more use, so that presently Lucy was standing in a damp patch. That means it was wet on the floor. "Mr. Dumnus," bawled Lucy in his ear, shaking him, "do stop. Stop at once. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, a great big faun like you. What on earth are you crying about?" "Oh, oh, oh," sobbed Mr. Dumnus. "I'm crying because I'm such a bad faun." "I don't think you're a bad faun at all," said Lucy. "I think you're a very good faun. You're the nicest faun I've ever met." He's the only faun she's ever met. Oh, you wouldn't say that if you knew," cried Mr. Tumnus between his sobs. "No, I'm the bad faun. I don't suppose there ever was a worse faun since the beginning of the world." "What have you done?" asked Lucy. my old father now," said Mr. Tumnus. "That's his picture over the mantelpiece. He would never have done a thing like this." "A thing like what?" said Lucy. "Like what I've done," said the fawn, "taking service under the White Witch. That's what I am. I'm in the pay of the White Witch." "Oh, the White Witch? Who is she?" "Why, it is she that has got all Narnia under her thumb. It's she that makes it always winter, and never Christmas." "Think of that! How awful," said Lucy. "But what does she pay you for?" "Well, that's the worst of it," Mr. Tumnus said, with a deep groan. "Oh, I'm a kidnapper for her. That's what I am. Look at me, daughter of Eve. Would you believe that I'm the sort of fawn to meet a poor, innocent child in the wood, one who had never done me any harm, and pretend to be friendly with it, and invite it home to my cave, all for the sake of lulling it asleep and then handing it over to the White Witch?" "No," said Lucy. "I'm sure you wouldn't do anything of the sort." "But I have," said the fawn. "Well," said Lucy rather slowly, for she wanted to be truthful and yet not too hard on him. "Well, that was pretty bad, but you're so sorry for it that I'm sure you'll never do it again." "Daughter of Eve, don't you understand?" said the fawn. "It isn't something I have done. I'm doing it right now, this very minute." "What do you mean?" cried Lucy, turning very white. "You are the child," said Mr. Tumnus. "I had orders from the White Witch that if I ever saw a son of Adam or a daughter of Eve in the wood, I was to catch them and hand them over to her. And you are the first I ever met. And I've pretended to be your friend and ask you to tea. And all the time I've been meaning to wait till you were asleep and then go tell her." "Oh, but you won't, Mr. Tumnus," said Lucy. "You won't, will you? Indeed, you really mustn't." "And if I don't," he said, beginning to cry again, "she's sure to find out. She'll have my tail cut off, my horns sawn off, my beard plucked out, and she'll wave her wand over my beautiful cloven hooves and turn them into horrid solid hooves, like our wretched horses. And if she's extra and specially angry, she'll turn me into stone, and I shall be only a statue of a fawn in her horrible house until the 4 thrones of Cair Paravel are filled, and goodness knows when that will happen, or whether it will ever happen at all." "I'm very sorry, Mr. Tumnus," said Lucy, "but please, let me go home." "Oh, of course I will," said the fawn. "Of course I've got to. I see that now. I hadn't known what humans were like before I met you. Of course I can't give you up to the witch, not now that I know you. But we must be off at once. I'll see you back to the lamp post. I suppose you can find your own way back to Spare and Wardrobe." "I'm sure I can," said Lucy. I don't know what pistol's barking at. "I'm sure I can," said Lucy. "We must go as quickly as we can," said Mr. Tumnus. "The whole wood is full of her spies. Even some of the trees are on her side." They both got up. They left the tea things on the table, and Mr. Tumnus once more put up his umbrella and gave Lucy his arm, and they went out into the snow. The journey back was not like the journey to the fawn's cave. They stole along as quickly as they could without speaking a word, and Mr. Tumnus kept to the darkest places. Lucy was relieved when they reached the lamp post again. "Do you know your way from here, daughter of Eve?" asked Mr. Tumnus. Lucy looked very hard between the trees, and she could just see in the distance a patch of light that looked like daylight. "Yes," she said, "I can see the wardrobe door." "Then be off home as quick as you can," said the fawn. "And can you ever forgive me for what I meant to do?" "Why, of course I can," said Lucy, shaking him heartily by the hand. "And I do hope you won't get into any dreadful trouble on my account." "Farewell, daughter of Eve," he said. "Perhaps I shall keep your handkerchief." "Rather," said Lucy, which means yes, and then ran toward the far-off patch of daylight as quickly as her legs would carry her. And presently, instead of rough branches brushing past her, she felt those fur coats. And instead of crunching snow under her feet, she felt wooden boards. And all at once, she found herself jumping out of the wardrobe and into the same empty room from which the whole adventure had started. She shut the wardrobe door tightly behind her and looking around, panting for breath. It was still raining. She could hear the voices of others in the passage. "I'm here," she shouted. "I'm here. I've come back. I'm all right." And that's the end of chapter 2.